people who know history a little bit, they bring up Stalin, of course. Like, Stalin was from Georgia, which is not the best thing to hear, obviously. It's like, you're from Austria. Well, Hitler was from Austria.
Hello, my name is Patrycja Rozwora, and you're listening to the very first episode of Kitchen Conversations. This podcast aims to open up the mysterious and vague Eastern Bloc to a broader international audience. Each episode is devoted to one artist, exploring their relation, interest, and urgency to create within the framework of the post-Soviet sphere. Today I'm speaking to Misho Antadze, a documentary film director born in 1993 in Tbilisi, Georgia. He studied film and video at CalArts in Los Angeles. After graduating, he worked as an editor and a translator before eventually moving back to Georgia in 2017, where he shot The Harvest. He's currently a researcher at Master of Film, Artistic Research in and Through Cinema at the Netherlands Film Academy. Today we will mainly talk about Misho's latest work, The Harvest, from 2018, that sets in Kakheti, eastern Georgia. 20 years ago, people of Georgia suffered daily power outages. Today, their country engages in a highly technological form of capitalism. Kakheti, a region famous for its mesmerizing nature and wine, is also the third largest exporter of Bitcoin in the world. The Harvest is a poetic exploration of the relationship between nature, technology, and the changing landscape. Please welcome Misho Antadze. For the beginning, I wanted to start asking you a very broad and open question.
Sure.
I know that you've been living in LA in the US, also
Yes.
now living here.
Right.
Maybe perhaps you lived somewhere else, I don't know.
No, this is it.
All right. I'm curious about some assumptions or misconceptions about Georgia, which you've encountered.
The biggest thing is that people don't know of its existence, right? Having to specify like that I'm not from the state of Georgia, which is ridiculous at this point.
It's interesting. Just before coming to you, I googled Georgia just to know how many people live there.
It was all about the
first
state.
thing was like the state in the US coming up, and the second only the country.
So that happens a lot. The second biggest misconception is this kind of association with Russia, right? Which I'm sure a lot of post-Soviet countries experience, but it's kind of especially painful because of the imperial relationship that Russia had with Georgia, and basically 3 centuries of occupation, and the fact that the cultures are not related. It's not a Slavic country, so it's ethnically different, it's culturally different, linguistically it's very different. Those assumptions get very bothersome very quickly. And even today, even like in Europe, sometimes you get this question like, oh, Georgia in Russia, and you're always like a bit startled by that. People who know history a little bit, they bring up Stalin, of course. Like, Stalin was from Georgia, which is not the best thing to hear, obviously. It's like, you're from Austria. Well, Hitler was from Austria. It's like, no one does that.
I think this would never happen, huh?
Yeah, of course not.
In the
No.
context of Austria, would never happen. I didn't know Stalin was from Georgia.
Yes.
Would you consider yourself as a documentary filmmaker?
Yes, I do definitely, but I also think that this kind of genre or designation has been hijacked a lot by journalism and reportage. Most of the things that you see labeled as documentary are usually not coming from the cinema tradition, and I think it's very important to distinguish those two. I mean, those films have a lot of value, and also entertainment value, and informational value, didactic value, but it's still a very, very different branch that they're coming from. And, you know, like, I think of myself first and foremost as a filmmaker. I've been making documentaries mostly, but, you know, I'm also, like, moving a bit towards fiction. I also received a very experimental film education for my bachelor's. And I'm trying not to distinguish it all that much. You know, I'm a filmmaker. I think cinema is a great tool for learning about the world. I mean, that's what really fascinates me in looking at the world. Actually, there's a... Man, I think I lent someone that book, but... yeah, it's something that my former teacher, Tom Anderson, wrote about. Which is like... people very often confuse truth with factuality. And I think at least the kind of cinema that I make, it's much more about searching for truth and not factuality. And again, as he said, factuality is not something you can achieve with film. You know, you frame, you cut, you basically make these kind of decisions which are at the most basic level constantly about including something or excluding something. So you will never really achieve something factual. And I think that's another difference between the kind of films that I make and a lot of filmmakers, documentary filmmakers that I like make, and what is referred to as documentary kind of in the popular discourse. Which is, I think, those kinds of films, it's always the same choice, what you include, what you exclude, but there's a kind of a pretense with those films that they somehow create a full picture, which I don't think is really achievable.
So this movie, The Harvest, you filmed after you came back to Georgia?
Yeah, after I came back to Georgia, before I came to the Film Academy in the Netherlands.
And how long did you live in LA?
7 years, basically.
Wow, that's how long I live here.
Oh, that's so crazy. Yeah, it's a long time, yeah.
Was like the topic of The Harvest somehow informed by your experiences of living in the US, or?
No, I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think what really drove the film was just curiosity. It had a funny start. It was a friend of mine in a bar who told me, like, oh, people are like mining Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in Kakheti, which I didn't really believe. And I had some friends in that region, or with connections in that region, so I kind of went to see for myself. And then, like, the movie really started to form. I even remember, like, I even wrote about it to someone else. Someone that I know who's an artist who's really interested in the digital world. Never really got a reply from him. So I thought, like, maybe I'll make the movie myself. And they thought it would be a short in the beginning, but then it really kind of expanded. Yeah.
How do I pronounce it?
Kakheti?
Kakheti.
Yeah.
You knew something about it before, or that was your first encounter?
Well, I mean, I really think there's this kind of... It holds a place in the Georgian imagination, so to speak. as a place of agriculture, a place of wine, where we associate like high quality produce with Kakheti, not necessarily with technology. Obviously, it wasn't my first time being there, but I can't really claim any other kind of a connection besides curiosity.
In the film, we see the landscape really like merging the technology with the nature.
Yeah.
And then this kind of randomly popping up architectural elements.
Yeah.
Is it something which you observe in the whole country, or is it specific to this region, or did it change throughout this 30 years now?
I think it's all of that. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of change, and I think it's also a result for the just kind of like the economic desperation that everyone went through after the fall of communism, and trying to latch on to ways to be entrepreneurial, so to speak, or make money. And it's not always easy. People aren't always successful with that. So there's a lot of different things that people have been trying. On the other hand, it's also there's kind of a misconception about rural life that it's devoid of technology, that it's just cows in a field. And actually, when you go there and you look at things, you realize how much technology is connected with the rural landscape, and there's much more of it in rural places than in urban places. Because that was one thing that I kind of realized when making the harvest, is that technology comes from agriculture, or it comes from at least making labor easier, and a lot of the tools that we have now really resemble the tools that have existed for thousands of years. And it was just really, really strange to see that kind of come together in the same landscape.
Yeah, I think the scene of milking the cow, no?
Yeah.
It's like thing standing for that. Do the people who you filmed, do they know what cryptocurrency is, or data mining?
Yeah, they do, and they understand it quite well. Again, I think it was one of those kind of assumptions that people have about rural life, that like, they just latched on to something that they don't quite understand, but they understand it very well. They're very well informed, and I also think maybe it's because of this kind of like relationship, like a complex relationship with technology that people who live in rural areas have, that they were able to kind of latch onto it much more.
So we are off the camera.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, I still don't understand anything about cryptocurrency, to be honest.
Yeah, that was my next question.
Like, I really don't. I kind of get it in a very abstract way. I've never like owned Bitcoin, maybe tried to buy it like just to see what it's like, but never like really took it that seriously. But yeah, I mean, it's there. It's obviously going to be like this, and I also think that like all the utopian aspirations of tech will, of Bitcoin, they will just disappear, and we'll be like left with like banks using the same technology. It will just become a part of our daily life.
You sent me 2 of your works.
Yeah.
And you said that you always intended this movie to be about history, but it's not always seen as such.
Yeah.
I'm interested, why is it like that?
Because I think, or at least I thought before making this film, that like, okay, I'm making a film about kind of a transitory moment. And, you know, like, unless I make this film now, then I'll miss the chance. And I think I was right, because less people are mining cryptocurrency now. And that kind of technology, again, is like really becoming more like part of more mainstream banking and whatnot. And, you know, I also think that like people don't really associate like films about technology with history. You look at certain things in retrospect, their historical value becomes much more apparent, you know, like things from the Industrial Revolution. Maybe something similar is happening now. We lack the kind of documentation. All the documentation is explanatory. It's never about kind of like looking at the process, looking at the labor involved. So, you know, if it disappears, also the opportunity to document it in that way also disappears. And yeah, I really thought that like, okay, like even if the historical context is not seen right now, maybe like 20 years, 30 years, maybe way longer later, it will have a different kind of value. That's something that I always try to think about, which is, okay, I'm not only filming for the present moment, I'm not only filming for present relevance, but kind of like a comparative relevance of trying to assume a longer perspective on things. Because that's also what I enjoy when I watch films. I actually probably watch films that are older more often than I watch contemporary films, because I'm fascinated with kind of seeing how things have changed. You know, like I'm really fascinated by the ephemerality of the moment that's captured on film, and I also think it's important to remember that even though they were basically camera tests, the very first films were kind of observational documentaries, you know, like workers leaving the factory, arrival of a train. Now they contain a completely different kind of viewing pleasure than they had at the moment when they were made. So yeah, it's something that I try to replicate, I suppose. And I'm very much drawn to filming things that I know are a bit overlooked and taken for granted and will not be there maybe in a decade. I actually like to talk about invisibility through my work. You know, the invisibility of the internet, the invisibility of history, the invisibility of certain kinds of labor, and making it present. So I don't like invisible music, I don't like invisible editing, I don't like invisible effects, and all of these things are very present in film today.
One of my favorite scenes was the one with the bees.
Yeah.
Where you have this guy with a construction hat just checking on the bees, and you really hear like a very intense buzzing. And then you have this switch of where the guy actually comes from and what's his job. Just sitting and watching this, I don't know, data mining machine or whatever it was. I think like in the rural places where the technology is not that dominant, or maybe there's no streets or no infrastructure, nature is way louder.
Yeah.
And I liked how you kind of juxtapose both of the sounds.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that a lot of the sound is constructed in my film. It's done in post-production. I think it's one thing that documentary filmmakers don't talk about that often, is that I think all of us really manipulate things through sound and put emphasis through sound, and most of the time it's just impossible to get that kind of sound on set. So a lot of it were like very, very conscious decisions, but nevertheless I still want to, even when I construct something, I want to keep an observational mode, I just forego narration because I really want things to kind of speak for themselves, even if I manipulate them, even if I kind of pick the sound, but it's still kind of always from, like the world of the frame itself. It's always diegetic, it's always coming from within. And yeah, I mean, it's another things that I just associate with just pleasures of cinema, which is just like, okay, like just looking and listening to things. I'm also quite surprised how many different sources emphasize that the film has no music, which is, I think it's quite natural not to include music in a film like this, but then I've started paying attention to a lot of other films and I realized, oh yeah, like almost everyone uses music to emphasize different kinds of emotions, and I don't like that at all. So for me it's quite natural that a film shouldn't have music, because either the music is used for some kind of soppy effect, or or it takes away from the actual quality of the music. It just the use of music in cinema, I think, needs to be very delicate, and we forget that.
Thinking about the content, in the very first scene, we see I thought it was like one of the strongest scenes as well, in the pink room, and then we see the butcher with the portrait of Stalin.
Yeah.
And then a small TV screen with the robot Sofia talking. It's funny because I did a work about this robot.
No way.
Yeah. I mean, I started
it.
certain research about it. And so at some point, I think in the end, when we already hear like other sounds, she's speaking about how like the Georgian language is like not gendered.
Yeah.
And how, there's no he or she, but everyone is they.
Basically, yeah. Which, like, again, it's like some kind of a very utopic aspiration, but it's a very conservative, very, like, kind of, I guess, a patriarchal society, but also a sexist society. And one of the questions that I get a lot is that, like, why didn't you have women minors in the film? And the answer to that is that basically we found one. She did it on a very small scale and didn't really want to be involved in the film. It's a very, like, male-dominated society. So, I think it's reflected in the film, and it's funny to, like, people make assumptions like, oh, it's a non-gendered language, as if somehow that could fix the problem. And obviously it doesn't.
I feel you even, like, made it even more explicit by, I think, placing those male characters in very masculine professions or jobs.
Yeah.
I don't know, I had the feeling, like, in various scenes we see, like, very over-masculine exercises like chopping the meat or hunting or like operating these heavy machines. Also, even like the boys play football or play video games.
Yeah, I mean, like, but that's the thing. I mean, like, I wouldn't say that the situation is evenly bad in all of Georgia. I think in the larger cities, at least for the region, you know, at least definitely in all of the Caucasus, like, I think women are freer, so to speak, and there's just more, at least attempts at equality. But in rural regions, it's a completely patriarchal society. It's very segregated by gender, so you mostly encounter women performing more domestic roles and men doing more work on the outside. On the other hand, it's also not so simple, because women are very much involved in labor. It's just labor that's not so visible. Well, I guess like everywhere else, but that's just kind of how it is now. But you know, I mean, like, again, this rural town where we lived in, Tel Aviv, one of the people that helped us out with pre-production was like a trans woman rights activist, and she lives there. And again, like, despite the assumptions that you have about rural places, these places can still surprise you.
Yeah, for sure. I thought it was quite ironic how you started the movie with this like robot speaking how amazing this land is, and like the language is so amazing and we can really learn a lot, and then you juxtapose it. This is not how you know.
Yeah.
I think there's like a big disconnection also with that you can just like come and change, put a narrative, Western narrative on all these regions, and suddenly everything is good.
Yeah, and it's kind of bothersome to be exoticized in one way or another way, you know, which is like either pretending, and both of these things from a Western perspective, which is like, you know, like, so exotic, kind of like, look at these noble savages, or the other perspective, which is like, okay, you know, like, un-Western and uncivilized, but obviously these things, they don't apply to any place. I mean, every place is complex, and these narratives, they're imposed everywhere, and they oversimplify everything, and so somehow all of us end up misunderstanding each other, you know. And I also see, like, for example, like, Georgian filmmakers use the same tropes, like, look at us, like, we're so exotic, or like fetishizing poverty, or on the other hand, pretending that it's some kind of paradise, you know, like, there's just always a lack of complexity. And I always think that there's a lack of complexity because people are very keen on imposing narratives on the world instead of looking at it.
You need some water?
No, I'm good. Yeah, I can. Do you want some water?
No, I'm fine also.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had the chance to show, or where did you have the chance to show the movie?
Everywhere. No, I mean, we premiered in Rotterdam, which was great. Unexpected.
In the film festival, right?
At the film festival, you know, which was kind of a big deal.
Super nice.
Yeah, actually showed it in Poland.
Yeah.
Yeah, at Millennium Docs Against Gravity in Warsaw. And it was very strange because that film festival, it's the kind of work they choose. It's very journalistic, and the first day I had a very engaged audience, you know, and with a very long Q&A, and on the second day, like, no one stayed for the Q&A. And showed the film in Korea, which was an incredible experience, in Jeonju, at the film won a prize there, kind of a Critics' Choice Prize. And for me, that was the most interesting experience, which is like, okay, like you just show it outside of the context of the West, and undeniably there's cultural differences that, especially like nothing about Georgia was very known to the audience, but they were very engaged, and we had a very interesting Q&A there. Where else did they show
Was it with a translator?
With the translator, yeah. And where else did we show it where it was interesting? Yeah, great experience in Slovenia and Serbia. Yeah, also won another prize in Serbia and at Palach. And well, we were just supposed to have the United States premiere, but that didn't happen because of the coronavirus. But I think people will be able to watch the film online quite soon. In Georgia, it kind of didn't have the best reception, because it's very conservative in its film tastes and in who people go to see. And it's a small country, everyone knows everyone, so people just end up going to the movies of their friends, so I would say that the film was mostly ignored. I mean, like, there was a lot of reporting on like all the prizes the film won and the premiere, and like kind of the film fund promoting itself, but when it actually came to screening the film, like, they just didn't make an effort. Yeah.
Yes, that's, I think, often the case. If you make a movie about a place, then it doesn't really connect so much to the place itself. I don't know.
Well, I think it's much more because it just doesn't fit into like the narratives that we as Georgians keep telling ourselves.
Which are?
Just very, I don't know, like, if first of all, it has to do with the form of filmmaking that we have embraced, which is very narrative, very character-based, very classic. And then, you make an observational work, and it's impossible to find the main character. People get somehow disinterested, because it just doesn't present things in a kind of a prepackaged way. Then it's a film which I think says that, like, okay, like, instead of telling you a story and explaining to you how things are done, I'm inviting you to look at things instead and draw up your own conclusions. And it's not common practice in Georgian cinema. I mean, like, I think that we have some really nice documentary filmmakers right now. I mean, Salome Jashi, she's one of my favorite filmmakers. Even her films that are very well respected and incredibly well made still explore things through characters, like latching on to the same people and staying with them till the end. And I just think there's so much more that one can do with cinema than that. So it wasn't surprising, this kind of lukewarm reception. Especially, like, I also think that there's this kind of attitude in Georgia towards film, which is like, like, documentary isn't really film, because of this kind of association with reporting and uncovering the truth. And I think one of the troubles that we had when making the film was that people were very wary when they heard that, like, we are documentary filmmakers, because they thought we were journalists. and we're out there to like fuck them out of something, you know, like cause a scandal. And you know, when they realized it wasn't that, people were generally very cooperative, but we couldn't get access to a few places because people are suspicious.
Yeah, I also had this experience when I was working on my graduation work. For my bachelor, I was filming in beauty salons.
Right.
In Poland, and people were really, scared that you kind of find out something or take something from them in means of knowledge, or there was a sense of like discomfort.
Yeah. I also think that filming in Georgia still allows for a kind of spontaneity that you can't get in other places, which is, like when the encounter is quite spontaneous, which it was in the scene with the cow herds in the mountains.
Oh, beautiful.
Like they trust you, they don't mind you filming. And the same, like when the cows were being milked in a different scene, we were just also invited there. The shepherds were very open to us filming as well. People can be very curious about what you're doing, and just very eager to help you out in any way they can, which I don't think would be the case with making a film in the West. I think people would still be more standoffish, because they would, I think immediately they would think, okay, what's the gain of the filmmaker and what's my gain to be filmed in this situation? And when that relationship doesn't exist, it's very easy.
What's the language you speak in Georgia?
Georgian.
And I also found information about Abkhazian language.
Abkhazian, yeah.
What's that?
Abkhazia is basically right now a breakaway region of Georgia. And it's difficult to speak about it.
So it's just one region which speaks that language?
Yeah. Also there's, and it's not related to Georgian. It's a different Caucasian language.
Do you know it?
No. There's several languages in Georgia that are spoken, which is, like Swan, Mingrelian, Georgian, Laz, that I'm not sure about the relationship, and Abkhaz. So for, like a place with only 4 million people living there, it's quite a lot. Also, I have to say that Armenian is spoken there, and Azeri is spoken there, and a few other, like the Bats language, which only has maybe 1,000 speakers left. And it's actually, all of the Caucasus was referred to by Arabs way back when as the mountains of tongues, because every mountain had its own language. And, even within Georgian, there's very stark differences in dialect, region by region. So yeah, it's interesting, but it also becomes somewhat dangerous when it gets mixed up with politics, especially with Abkhaz. Because Abkhazia basically, it's occupied by Russia today. And it's...
So this region is located in the north?
It's in the northwest, yeah. So it's so-called South Ossetia. And, it's something that most Georgians, they're kind of reluctant to speak about in the way that I do, because I think that some of the grievances that those people had with Georgia were legitimate, but I also know that most of them were sparked. The conflict itself was definitely sparked with Russian support. I don't like the tone that Georgia has had in its reconciliation efforts. I think much more has to be done, but I still believe in reconciliation. Yeah.
Maybe like a big question, if you think this work or your general practice is political.
Tough one. Yes, I think so. In as much that all work is political, but I also think that it's important to, I mean, I don't think anyone can pretend to have a neutral viewpoint on something, but really to, when making a work, kind of enter, I suppose, a more meditative state, when you don't let your preconceptions stop you from filming things that don't fit into your worldview. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, because I think that happens a lot. And I think it's difficult to include things that go against your narrative into your work. But as a filmmaker, that's your responsibility. As an artist, it's also your responsibility. Especially when you know that no matter what you make, it's political.
Can you give an example of one of these things which you included despite?
In The Harvest, well, I think it's just the fact that it's not taking the stance of Bitcoin mining is bad, it's just bad for the environment, but also showing how much effort goes into maintaining these and the relationship that the locals have with it, and that it might actually suit them in the short term for survival, which is again I think one of the reasons why people think that I'm very pro Bitcoin, which I'm not at all. Yeah.
It's funny because I would think the opposite.
Right.
I would think if an artist does a work about it, it's rather to show the critical side of it. But that's true that the work was pretty neutral. I mean, you left interpretation to the viewer.
Well, I mean, again, I don't think it's a neutral work. I really think that, I've really chosen these places and people and things to show that start to speak for themselves, especially in the bigger picture, which doesn't happen often in films. I think you from the beginning usually you're already told what to think and what to expect and what the film is about, and kind of this almost cowboy westerns narrative of the good guys and the bad guys, and things are never that simple. Actually, one of the things that people don't like about the film, I've encountered it quite often, is that there's no one speaking and telling them what what's going on, but that's just how people exist. I mean, I think most of us, when we're working, we don't talk about our work. We talk about something else. We always want to be somewhere else, and dialogue is kind of a means of escape. And I wanted to include that in the film, because it also brings in the rest of the world into it.
Yeah, I'm curious if you can talk a bit about your next work, which I already had the pleasure to see, which is super amazing but very disturbing also.
Right. Well, it's called Ozymandias. The title is from a Percy Shelley poem, and I think it's a film about statues. I think it's a film about the presence of history and the invisibility of history through statues and monuments. I mean, specifically they're about statues to Stalin. But I really just wanted to explore that topic and the presence of these statues today. Again, not by constructing a narrative around like Stalinism in Georgia today, or, you know, like kind of these cliches of the old and the new, but really just to kind of like go to these places where the statues still remain and look at them and learn something from that. And I don't know how much else I can say about the film at the moment because I'm still figuring it out.
Especially with the situation now, right? That we cannot travel.
Yeah, because right now I was supposed to be making sound for this film as well, but I'm stuck here without the possibility to do that.
Where can people see the harvest?
It can be seen on the website of the International Film Festival of Rotterdam. I think it's open for streaming. And I don't know, I think it costs maybe €4 to see it.
And last but not least, I wanted to know your favorite Georgian recipe.
Yeah, which is, it's a funny question because I'm not a very good cook. I have to look up recipes usually, but when I'm pressed to make something Georgian, I usually make Bazhe, which is this kind of, usually it's like chicken or some kind of poultry in walnut sauce. And I actually I have the recipe written down.
Nice, you can send it to me. Although I don't eat meat, but maybe I can.
Yeah, but here's the thing. When I have vegetarian guests over, or when I'm cooking for vegetarian friends, I substitute it with fried cauliflower, and
That's nice.
It goes quite well. And actually, it's quite a long recipe, and it takes a while of preparation.
Is it something you eat for a specific day in the year? Or?
No, but it's quite common around New Year's, I think. Not for any specific association with New Year's either.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
meeting on this sunny now day.
Thank you.
You were listening to Kitchen Conversations. To find Misho's favorite Georgian recipe as well as the link to his work The Harvest, please see the show notes. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and till next time!